Hello, fellow teachers, and welcome to this supplemental teaching activities video for Doctrine and Covenants, Section 2, and Joseph Smith History 1, verses 27 through 65. The purpose of these videos is not to focus on commentary and insight. That's the purpose of the insight video that's been released in conjunction with this video. But my purpose here is to focus specifically on the hows of teaching and provide you with ideas, activities, and questions that you might consider using if you're planning to teach a Come Follow Me lesson this week. Now remember, the intention is not to use every idea or every slide, but to pick and choose the ones that you feel are best suited to the needs of your students and your particular time frame. Let's go ahead and get started though. Lesson number 1, preparing a prophet. Truth. God lovingly provides us with preparation, just as He did for Joseph Smith, to fulfill our divine responsibilities and accomplish great things in His kingdom. And I'll tell you, it's very easy to get the fire in the bones for this lesson because it's so incredibly relevant, especially if you're teaching young people. But adults can relate to it just as well because we all are children of God, growing up to the measure of the stature of Christ. Even if you're 90, you've still got growing to do to attain the status of God or goddess. And one of the things that makes this lesson so fun and exciting is that great moment when you reveal that God has given them all of the same things that He gave Joseph to prepare him. It builds to that moment and really has an impact when it hits. Because it's like, wow, God cares just as much about my preparation as He did about Joseph Smith's. So our job as teachers is to help our students feel God's love for them and show them just how much He invests in their preparation and their potential. You want them to leave feeling grateful and inspired to take advantage of all those things that He's given them. The object I would display for this lesson would be a hammer and a chisel. At some point in the lesson, you might want to make the following illustration. I like to show them this picture of an unfinished sculpture by Renaissance artist Michelangelo. And I really like it because you can obviously see the figure that he's creating, and it's starting to emerge from the stone. Tell your students that they are very much like that sculpture. God is carving them into something incredible, something beautiful, something divine even. But getting to that point is going to take a lot of time and work, more than a lifetime's worth of work. And at that point, I'd hold up the hammer and the chisel and say, God is working on you. With every experience, with every challenge and lesson and warning and interview, He's chipping away at this divine work of art that you are. Remember, you're not there yet. We're works in progress. This life is a time of preparation. One day, the finished sculpture is going to emerge, and we're going to find ourselves something that we never imagined we could be. And I like the icebreaker that I used in the Insight video regarding professions that require a lot of preparation. And have your students guess which professions they imagine would require the most schooling, the most preparation. Then transition to a conversation about the future responsibilities that Joseph Smith would have, and make the point that he too would need a time of preparation before God would entrust him with such sacred responsibilities. Search activity then would come section by section as you walk your students through each of those verses that demonstrates something God provided Joseph with to help him be prepared. Take your students to the indicated verses, invite somebody to read them, or read them as the teacher, while asking them to ponder the following question. What did God give Joseph to help prepare him for his future sacred responsibilities? For a handout, you could give them this thinking map, which has all the indicated verses that I lead them through as I demonstrated in the Insight video, and a place for them to write a description of the method of preparation that's described in those verses. Not only serves as a vehicle to guide them through the scripture study, but afterwards it's something they could put into the scriptures as a reminder of the principles that they've learned that day. Or I'd like to give you another option for covering those thoughts with the following game idea. It's called quick cards. You divide your students up into teams and give each of them a pile of cards. And on the cards are each of the preparation principles, plus a few that aren't going to be used at all, just to make the activity more challenging. Then you, as the teacher, are going to shout out the verses that describe those principles. And their job is going to be to raise up the correct matching principle for those principles. And the first team to do so gets a point. And the team with the most points by the end of the activity wins. For a video, I really like this short animation describing the events that we study in this week's scripture block. And although its intended audience is probably primary children, it really does an excellent job of highlighting and summarizing the major points of Joseph's preparatory period. A search question that you could ask before they start watching would be, as you watch, look for as many examples of things God did to help Joseph prepare for the responsibility of caring for and translating the gold plates. A discussion question that you're going to want to ask after you've gone through those verses that describe Joseph's preparation would be this: what are some of the great future responsibilities that you may have? And after that, what has God given you for your future sacred responsibilities? Which is going to lead you into that wonderful discussion of how God has given us, them, all of the same things. The take it to heart question that I would ask would be similar. How has God given you each of the same things that he gave Joseph? And then just go through each of the things on that list, describing and discussing how God has provided us with those things. For what I will go and do, what is something that you could do to better take advantage of these preparatory blessings? And that's an important question because we can resist those things or take them for granted or squander our potential. Some of the suggestions that I provide them with: recognize my challenges as opportunities for growth. Seek forgiveness for past mistakes and overcome bad habits. Make sure that prayer and scripture study are a meaningful part of my life. Seek to listen carefully to prophetic guidance and heed prophetic warnings and commit to living the commandments. And before I finished this lesson, I'd be sure to make one final point to my students. I'd send them to verse 28 to look for one more thing that we learn about Joseph's youth, how he describes it. And in that verse, we learn that he wasn't perfect, that he displayed the weakness of youth and was guilty of doing some things that he said and felt were offensive in the sight of God. And I think that's an important point for all of us to understand about the prophet and indeed our own growth. We too are going to make some mistakes in our journey of preparation. And you'll notice that on the handout, I provided a space for them to make a note of that principle as well. The quote that I would share in this lesson after making that point is that rather extensive one from Oliver Cowdery, describing Joseph's initial experience at the Hill Cumorah. And I love that one because it shows his humanity. I think sometimes as teachers, we may place Joseph on too high of a pedestal. But if we realize that even the prophet of the restoration made some errors, and needed help, needed experience, it's going to give us hope that God can do incredible things with us too, despite our shortcomings and our failures. Our takeaway slide then serves as a reminder that God provides preparation for his prophets and his people to fulfill his powerful purposes. Before he ever gives us the weight of awesome responsibility, he rounds up and strengthens our shoulders for the load. And isn't that amazing? God cares just as much about our future in his church as he did about Joseph. Lesson number 2, reclaiming the lost. This next lesson's meant to be brief, and its message stems from just one single verse in this week's material. But I feel that what it teaches is so important that it deserves its own treatment. It's a lesson that, if understood and applied, would change the world significantly. change it for the better. And it applies to everyone, no matter who we are or what we believe. And in the Insight video, I only touched on it briefly, but here we're going to give it the full lesson treatment, albeit it's going to be more concise. Our truth: when encountering those who believe or act differently, rather than resorting to hostility or exclusion, treat them with kindness, friendship, and love to gently guide and reclaim them. The fire in the bones for this short lesson is a really important principle. It's a principle that could change the world, because there's an issue or question that all people or organizations or religions have got to answer, no matter what you believe in or don't believe in. What do we do with those who don't agree? People that we feel have got it wrong, that act in ways that we disagree with, or that think and believe differently. Sadly, most of the time, hostility and exclusion are the answer. Or worse, violence. History, both ancient and modern, is replete with examples of people treating those who don't agree or that are different in some way poorly, whether those differences be religious, cultural, intellectual, or political. Our job as teachers then, with this one, is to inspire our students to follow Joseph's advice and Jesus's example, to be peacemakers rather than dividers. If you wish to have a bit of an object lesson, you could bring in a stuffed sheep. And with that stuffed sheep, you could ask your students if they recall that Jesus compared himself to a shepherd. And do they remember what he said he would do if one of his sheep got lost, if they wandered, if they strayed from the fold? He said that he would go after them. He'd search for them. He would seek to rescue them, and then carry them back to the fold on his shoulders. That's what Jesus did with lost sheep. And what are the lost sheep? These are people that we feel are straying or have strayed. People that we don't agree with. People that we don't see as part of the fold. Therefore, what should we do when we encounter them? My suggestion would be to follow Jesus' example. And I can't think of any other verse in Scripture that more powerfully illustrates and gives expression to that idea of rescuing the lost than Joseph Smith History, verse 28. And if you don't have a stuffed sheep lying around and you can't borrow one from somebody, I'll provide a link to one that you could purchase on Amazon if you're interested. And if you wanted to take this object lesson a step further, you could also bring in a shepherd's staff and a sword. And with these objects, you could ask your students what most people bring when they encounter lost sheep. Sadly, most bring the sword, meaning hostility, exclusion, contention. But what's the alternative? The crook, the shepherd's staff, a means of gently pulling them back into your company rather than lashing out or threatening them. I'll also provide some links to some plastic costume props of those two objects that you could also get if you wanted. Then for an icebreaker, I'd take that stuffed sheep and I would hide it somewhere in the room or the building that I was teaching in and give my students a challenge to be the first person to find it. And once it's been found, you can ask them why we sometimes go to great lengths to find things that are lost. And then you're going to say, sometimes what gets lost isn't a thing, but a person, a friend, a family member, or even somebody with different beliefs than ours. Today, we're going to talk about what we can do when we encounter those that we believe are lost. The search activity then is very simple. Remind them that Joseph Smith did not believe what the other people in his community believed. In their eyes, he was a lost sheep. But how did they treat him? They treated him very poorly. He was severely persecuted and ostracized for not believing what everybody else around him believed. Now, I want you to read verse 28 and see if you can find Joseph's solution for dealing with lost sheep or those who disagree. He gives us a better solution. And of course, the answer is having been forbidden to join any of the religious sects of the day, and being of very tender years, and persecuted by those who, here's the solution, ought to have been my friends, and to have treated me kindly, and if they supposed me to be deluded, to have endeavored in a proper and affectionate manner to have reclaimed me. Ah, such a great phrase. That is going after the lost sheep. That's Joseph's solution, and it's Jesus's solution. A video that could accompany this lesson would be the following one, entitled, How to Show Christ-like Kindness to Others. And it's based on President Nelson's phenomenal General Conference talk from just a few years ago, where he passionately encouraged us all to be peacemakers. It reiterates and reinforces the principles that are taught here in Joseph Smith History, verse 28. Quote, Elder Anderson, the Lord taught how to live then and now in a contemptuous world. Blessed are the peacemakers, he declared, for they shall be called the children of God. By the shield of our faith in Jesus Christ, we become peacemakers, quenching, meaning to calm, cool, or extinguish, all the fiery darts of the adversary. Discussion question: why is it often difficult to show love and kindness to those who oppose or criticize our beliefs? And how can we overcome those feelings? Now, the following handout or application activity is going to serve as both a take it to heart and I will go and do question. Invite your students to ponder and answer the following two questions. Think of somebody in your life who thinks or believes differently than you do, or somebody that you suspect may feel lost or excluded, and write their name in this blank here. What could you do this week to apply the lesson? How could you be more of a friend to that person, to treat them more kindly, or affectionately seek to reclaim them? You then invite them to place this piece of paper in their scriptures on page 51 of the Pearl of Great Price, and tell them that they're not allowed to remove it until they've acted on their plans. Takeaway slide then reminds them that when they encounter lost sheep, to treat them with kindness, not contention. Kindness, not contention. That was Joseph's way. That was Jesus's way. Now, our third and final lesson plan for this week comes from section 2 of the Doctrine and Covenants, the first recorded revelation of the restoration. Short in length, huge in significance. The truth. The work of turning our hearts to our fathers and linking families through temple ordinances is a vital part of God's plan. And the fire in the bones for this lesson is kindled from the power of the very idea of family history. There's a fire that burns when an individual sincerely engages in both family history and temple work. Sometimes refer to it as the spirit of Elijah. And that spirit, that's real. It's a powerful force. And not just in the church. Family history is still considered to be the second most popular hobby in the United States, just behind gardening, and the second most visited category of websites, behind, sadly, pornography. So our task as teachers is to help ignite that fire of learning more about our roots and performing a great act of service for our ancestors by performing temple ordinances on their behalf. Section 2 combines these two great things, these things that are easy to get excited about: family history and the temple. And an object that you could bring in, a potted plant. And the reason is that that's going to key off one of the phrases that's found in Doctrine and Covenants chapter 2, verse 2, where we're told that Elijah will plant in our hearts the promises made to our fathers. As you talk about that verse, you can display your plant and ask your students to consider what those promises look like in their lives. What does the soil of their soul look like? Have the promises been planted? Are they growing? Is there a big, beautiful plant there, or is it non-existent or full of weeds? It can become a nice visual symbol of our dedication to doing work for the dead. Now, I actually have two icebreakers that I like to do for this lesson. One, I like the search activity that sends my students into the 5 standard works to see that this prophecy is found in each, making the point that this suggests how important this section is. I also like to share the John A. Whitsoe quote in conjunction with that point. And once they understand the significance of section 2, I like to move on to the funny questions activity that I shared with you in the Insight video, because that introduces them to the major search activity for this lesson, which is to read each of the 3 verses in the section and to write down a question that they have about each one. And they're going to write those questions down on the provided handout. And that basically sets up the bulk of your lesson. After they've had time to study and write their questions, you just start discussing and answering those questions verse by verse. And in the Insight video, I give you lots of material, lots of slides and quotes and insights. It's hopefully going to help you to be prepared to have a meaningful experience with those 3 verses. And you can either ask for volunteers to share their questions or just call on people because they're going to have something prepared already to ask. And also, if there are any questions that you as a teacher feel should be covered, I think that you should feel free to add those questions to the discussion. For a video, you may choose to show Discovering My Family's History, which opens with President Eyring referring to these very verses in Doctrine and Covenants section 2, and then relates an inspirational story of a sister missionary in Germany who discovers the power of family history while serving a mission. There's lots of quotes for you to use and to choose from in the lesson, so I'm not going to add any more here. But they do come in handy when it comes to answering some of the questions that your students might ask about Doctrine and Covenants section 2 and Work for the Dead. But I'll mention here that I really love sharing near the conclusion of the lesson at some point the words of Elder David A. Bednar as he reiterates the great promised blessings that the Lord has to offer us when we accept his invitation to turn our hearts to our ancestors. For a take it to heart, if you have already done family history or temple work, what is one specific experience that strengthened your testimony of it? And as the teacher, I'd suggest you have an experience of your own to share. Have you ever been inspired by a story from one of your ancestors? Have you ever experienced the fire of the spirit of Elijah as you engaged in family history research or temple work? Have you ever felt the connection with the people of the past as you did baptisms for the dead or other ordinances for them in the temple? Share one of those experiences with your class. For an I will go and do, what are some simple things that you could do this week to begin or continue the work of family history? And I give some suggestions there on that slide. The takeaway slide then will hopefully remind your students to allow the spirit of Elijah to plant within their hearts the powerful promises of the Abrahamic covenant and inspire them to grow the plant of family history work in their lives. Serves as a reminder to go out and engage with this glorious and soul-saving labor of love. And that will conclude this supplemental teaching activities video this week. I pray that it helps you to be more prepared and to feel the fire in the bones for these lessons. Thank you so much for watching. Now get out there and teach with power.